All right, what is going on, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach JK McLeod, and we are kicking off a fitness, nutrition, training adjacent episode as we typically do on every Tuesday here at the Help Me Understand podcast. Before we kick off today's episode, where I am going to talk about cardio and I'm going to do my best to try to simplify cardio, what it is, a little bit of a unpopular opinion, maybe even a hot take that I have about HIIT versus sit, and then what it actually means when folks talk about utilizing cardio for body composition versus utilizing cardio for heart health, all that stuff. So I'm going to break that down for you in just a little bit. But first, as always, I want to say thank you, express some gratitude for you choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I know that you have no shortage of podcast content that you can consume. So I don't take it for granted that you chose to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I would sincerely appreciate it if you are currently listening on whatever platform that you could hop on and leave a rating, review, comment, like, subscribe, whatever is available to you on the current platform that you're listening to. And even if you want to hop over to another platform and do the same thing, I would sincerely appreciate it. So again, thank you for listening to the Help Me Understand podcast. I appreciate it. So let's get into today's topic, and we are going to talk about cardio. So first, let me start by laying the foundation for why I'm getting into this particular topic. It is something that, from my point of view, seems to ebb and flow in the fitness zeitgeist, the atmosphere of, or the fitness solar system when it comes to what's hot in the fitness streets. And from, I'd say, over the last couple of years, maybe even a bit further back, let's say the last 2 to 5 years, there has, from my point of view, been a big shift in really trying to help people understand that sometimes they're overdoing the cardio, that the amount of time that they're spending, the avatar of the endless hours on the treadmill or the Stairmaster or going for run after run after run, trying to walk people through. I get it that you're spending a whole lot of time doing that. Why are you spending so much time doing cardio versus also, because it's not an or, I'd say, why are you spending so much time doing cardio and barely any actual strength or resistance training? And more often than not, the response was typically, well, just trying to burn more calories that'll get me to my weight loss slash fat loss goal faster if I do more cardio. So I'd say that over the last 5 or less years, there has been a big push, especially within or on social media, with really trying to get folks to break free of the belief that more cardio automatically equals more or faster results. So I've watched that pendulum swing from one end all the way to the other end. And if I'm being even 50% honest here, I probably have contributed to more of the problem in that aspect when it comes to trying to really shift the momentum more towards strength training. I've probably been more of the problem, if I'm being like even 60% honest, than I have been part of the solution. And it's a realization that I came to a couple of years ago, where even though in my head, as I'm talking to people about trying to make sure that they're implementing a solid amount of resistance training into their weekly fitness regimen, it was being perceived as JK hates cardio. JK thinks cardio sucks. Well, running sucks. Can't change my mind on that. For me, okay? It just overall that I was a complete cardio hater, and I think that it has no useful value. And while that could not be further from the truth, I completely get where that perception was coming from, because very rarely did I also tout as strongly for the heart health benefits of cardio as I was talking about why people needed to chill with getting on the Stairmaster for an hour after every workout, which that was a scenario, either getting on the Stairmaster or high incline treadmill, doing that sort of stuff for an hour after every single workout, and then on off days. And somebody like myself, who's been in the fitness industry for a number of years, after you start to see some version of that same movie for quite some time, I'm human just like everybody else. It can start to help you form some biases that are not necessarily the most helpful overall. So now what I'm working to do is be a bit more vocal around where the context of the things that I talk about in relation to whether it's cardio, strength training, carbohydrates, fats, walking, sleep, just all the different things, just trying to be more vocal around some of the context and some of the nuance. I'll never catch everything. I'm not even going to hold myself to that standard. And also, I just realized maybe I can do a bit better of a job. So that's a big part of where this is coming from. So first, let's talk about what cardio actually is and understand that my goal with this episode is to try to simplify a topic that I believe becomes more and more complicated by the day. All right. So cardio, by definition, is any movement that increases your heart rate above resting and keeps it there for a sustained period of time. So again, any movement that increases your heart rate above resting and keeps it there for a sustained period of time. So you might be thinking, okay, well, when you say above resting heart rate, that means like anything above when I'm, sleeping, that sort of a thing. This is where I'd like to simplify. Let's branch out a little bit. So generally, a low effort, no effort heart rate can generally be somewhere around, even apprehensive throwing this out there, but I'd say generally around 60 to 100 beats per minute, depending on the individual. So if you find yourself being consistently above that for minutes at a time, then yeah, you're doing cardio. So it also, though, is not just about what heart rate you're at. Yes, by definition or by number and by data, sure. If that's what we only want to focus on, then okay. I also am a pretty big advocate for it being a lot about the amount of effort that you're putting into the movement itself. So that's where something that we call RPE, which is the rate of perceived exertion, comes into play. So again, starting off just really basic, cardio is going to be any sort of movement that increases your heart rate above like your typical very zero effort, not a whole lot of effort zone, and keeps it there for a sustained period of time. So when we talk about the rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, I'd say that in my world, more often than not, we are talking about that when we're referring to resistance training and specifically hypertrophy. When we talk about RPE, which is again, rate of perceived exertion with lifting weights, strength training, resistance training, however you want to put that header there, hypertrophy. One of the primary tenets of hypertrophy is that you generally are lifting somewhere between leaving 1 to 3 reps in the tank, which, not to nerd out too hard, but which basically translates to an effort on a scale of 1 to 10, an effort that's somewhere like a 7 to 9, 7 to 10, basically on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being like not even like I'm lifting like nothing. This is not very difficult. 10 being, I think that I am about to meet Jesus on this last rep. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, RPE, rate of perceived exertion, that's what that is. Now, we're typically, again, talking about that when it comes to resistance training. However, this is starting to, or not even to say starting to, this is continuing to gain more and more popularity within the world of cardiovascular exercise. So doing things specifically like running, rowing, biking, ski erg, just thinking about like some of the different cardio things that are out there. RPE is beginning to, or continuing. Words are hard right now. I'm recording this later in the afternoon. continuing to pick up some additional steam here. I think that a big portion of that has to do with the growing popularity of hybrid athletes. So bodybuilders or people who primarily have done bodybuilding or strength training starting to really implement more of what's called the hybrid or concurrent, depending on what camp you're in, approach, where they're now wanting to be just as good at strength training or be just as committed to building muscle as they are with also being committed to be able to hop on a bike and go for a long ride, being able to do a 5K, a 10K, or maybe even a half marathon or more, that sort of a thing. So I think that this is just from my perspective, a good portion of why the RPE scale is being talked about more and more outside of just strength training and now being talked about in cardiovascular exercise is because of a decent amount of the strength and bodybuilding world really starting to grasp onto cardio. Okay, so when we are talking about that RPE, I think that when it comes to getting an understanding of the level of intensity of the cardio that you're doing, and this will come into play a little bit later in this episode where I talk about HIIT, I think that the RPE scale is helpful. And something that I will share with people is something called a talk test. So instead of getting like too bogged down in, am I in zone 2 or am I in zone 4? Or am I in zone 3.25? That sort of thing. Again, I'm all about the simplification. I like to try and identify, especially when I'm doing like my in-person training, let's try to run through the talk test when you're trying to figure out like your zone 2 or if you're actually doing sprint intervals, like that sort of a thing. So here's a general range that I'll give you that I jotted down. So if we're talking low intensity, that would be, and we're using the talk test here. So low intensity, that would be typically an RPE of about 2 to 4. That's something like a walk, a light bike ride. You typically, from a talk test standpoint, should still be able to speak in full sentences. This is where I am also identifying for people, like if you're talking zone 2, an example that I'll commonly use is if you were on a Zoom or a Teams meeting right now and you were getting in your zone 2 and they called on you to speak up on the call, I'm pretty sure your camera's off because you're trying to hide the fact that you're getting in some movement while you're on that meeting. If you're in like a corporate setting or something like that, maybe work from home, but hey, you got to get your fitness in. If they called on you to speak, you would be able to speak. Maybe they potentially would be able to pick up on a little bit of labored breathing, but you still could talk in complete full sentences. And it would seem more like maybe you were just kind of walking up a slight incline at the same time. But you should be able, if you're at low intensity, an RPE of 2 to 4, what a lot of folks kind of commonly refer to as like zone 2-ish, zone 2 or 3, you typically should be able to hold that pace for a prolonged period of time. Okay, so that's the low intensity portion of the talk test. If we're then going moderate intensity, that's where the RPE is probably going to be somewhere between 5 to 7. That's where we're starting to do some jogging, a bit more of like a higher incline walk. And if you needed to talk, you could speak up. However, it would typically be in pretty short phrases. You're not going on like long drawn out monologues like I do on my podcast right now. That's where you know that you're in that middle range. Like you are, it's definitely not super low intensity, but it's also not like I feel like I am trying to compete with Carl Lewis, like the little throwback with sprints to try to qualify for the Olympics. And then I also got like Flojo over in the left lane. So that's moderate intensity. Again, right around RPE of 5 to 7. So talk test wise, you'd be able to speak, but it would be in very short phrases. So still doable. Now, the most difficult range, that's going to be your high intensity. That is going to be an RPE of 8 to 10. So this is where you have like your sprints and what are supposed to be your hard intervals. And again, I'll get to this interval piece in just a minute because that's a portion that I'm going to hit the very short soapbox on a minute here. So this is where, from a talk test standpoint, there should literally be no talking possible because you realize the importance of still just trying to be able to breathe because you are giving such a hard effort. Okay, so those are really the three categories when it comes to identifying the talk test of the intensity of the cardio that you're doing, how you can utilize that. So again, cardio itself is it's a huge umbrella, like a massive umbrella, because again, it's any movement that's going to increase your heart rate above your normal low effort zone. So just simply saying I do cardio is super incomplete because that doesn't really tell you anything. So if you are having a conversation with a coach and you just say I do cardio and that coach doesn't ask for a bit more specifics, like help me understand a little bit about what that looks like. Are you going to classes or that sort of a thing? Are you going for runs? Typically about how long? Ever had to take a phone call while you're doing cardio? How did that go? Because you can get an idea of what the intensity has looked like. Like that should be something that you're kind of on the lookout for if you're working with a coach or a trainer, something like that. So again, just wanting to help you try and identify when it comes to what cardio is, and then also just getting an understanding for there being some different categories of intensity. So you've got low, moderate, and high, and then hopefully the talk test is something that can be helpful for you to identify. Are you in the low area, are you in the moderate, or are you in the high? And I want to clarify, all of these different categories have their places and spaces here. So I'm certainly not here to say, well, if you aren't ready to vomit, that means you're not actually doing cardio. No, that would pretty much be an ignorant and asinine statement. So again, different types of cardio for different situations. All right. So something that I had shared on Threads, and it's something that I'll share with you here, is I really, really think that maybe the better way to put it is like hot take, unpopular opinion, whatever it might be, that the growing popularity of sprint interval training, which I believe I didn't really hear about this much until Dr. Stacy Sims started talking about it quite a bit, and she very well could have coined the phrase. I'm not completely sure. It's just I really, really, the more and more that I look into it, believe that a big part of why sit became a thing is because people basically bastardized HIIT. So if you're not familiar, sit is sprint interval training, and then HIIT is high intensity interval training. And as someone who has trained people in person, and that's where I got my start, was in training, doing personal training, semi-private training, and then also doing large group. And the first large groups that I got, and when I say large groups, it was supposed to be large groups. We started off with like 5 people. And thank God that those 5 people believed in me enough to stick with me for a while and then invite some friends. And we basically then grew to a large group. But I don't know if there's any trainers that are out here listening who are just getting started or maybe transitioning to doing classes or things like that. Side note, do not get discouraged if for the first like 5-6 weeks, maybe even a little bit longer, like 3 people show up to your class. Just keep pouring into those 3 people and they'll tell 3 people. And then as long as you stay consistent, they will eventually show up. So just a little side note there. But anyways, a big portion of where I got my start was in doing large group training. And when I started doing large group training, I was given a template to follow for the classes. And I can tell you that probably 2 classes in, I stopped using that template, not because it was bad at all. It's just that what I observed is that people were coming in and they were thinking that they were doing cardio, or they were thinking that they were doing strength training. Excuse me, let's get specific. They were thinking they were doing high intensity cardio, or there would be another class that the overall theme was supposed to be strength training. So they would think that they were doing strength training when really they were doing like the template that I got. Again, it wasn't bad training. It just was not specific enough for what the people were believing that they were supposed to be doing. So that's where I got my first like official professional certified start in creating my own programming for larger groups. Prior to that, I had written some stuff for myself, but not with any sort of formal education. So after going through study and certifying and things like that, became much more aligned with what the strategy should actually be. Again, with sit, sprint interval training, what I've been able to get an understanding of when it comes to sit versus HIIT. Sit itself, sprint interval training, again, typically you're going to hear this if you trace, like if you pull on the thread, it's typically rooted in a lot of the content coming out from Dr. Stacy Sims. And it essentially is very, very short sprint intervals at maximum intensity. Like we are talking all out effort, max intensity for a short period of time. Generally, I don't have this jotted down, but I would say I generally, if I'm programming sit for somebody who is on that particular train, then we'd say about 30 seconds of effort. And then we are resting for a significant period of time until they are just about fully recovered to go again. So with that, if you're working out, if you're going max effort for 30 seconds, and I mean like actual max effort, then we are likely going to be resting probably about 2-ish minutes, give or take. I'd say it's about 2-ish minutes or more. So that would be sprint interval training where you're going a 10 out of 10 rate of perceived effort at 10. Now, and you're having a longer rest period. HIIT tends to be where this is how just generally I see it programmed. HIIT tends to be something where it's like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Or folks will even take like Tabata and use that as HIIT, where it's 20 seconds of work and then 10 seconds of rest. But even the way that Tabata is used sometimes is a little bit different when it comes to advertising it as high intensity interval training. So the difference being between sit has short burst, long rest. HIIT has short burst, short rest. Now, what typically ends up happening, this is my observation with HIIT, and I'll get off this topic in a minute. My observation with HIIT is that people just flat out aren't working hard enough during their HIIT. So as that has been the scene for a number of years now, like walk into a general, like a commercial gym, go into a boot camp class or anything of those sorts, like your Les Mills classes and things like that, the choreographed classes and all that stuff. Yes, those fall underneath cardio because you are above your no effort heart rate. Yes, that is cardio. However, to call it HIIT, I just have to break it to you. That would be incorrect because it's not being done at a high enough intensity for it to actually be HIIT. If you can do the movements and also talk to your friend who's next to you, then it's definitely not in the higher intensity range. So I truly believe that HIIT has been watered down so much to where it's now moderate intensity training. So then we've got to bring a phrase like sit into play to remind people or to get people to actually work hard enough. So that's just my lukewarm take or whatever it might be. So the main takeaway, hopefully, from this little portion, and then I'll talk about a couple of different ways that people use cardio and close this out. Main takeaway from this particular portion is that I really want to try and simplify as much as possible when people are talking about, well, sometimes I don't really feel like I should be doing HIIT. I should be doing sit and whatnot. It all falls under the same bucket. Overall, if you are doing your cardio with a high enough level of intensity, then you should need more than a 1-to-1 rest ratio. So if you're going like balls to the wall for 30 seconds and you only need 30 seconds to recover from that, and you're a general population person like me and most of the people that I coach and a good majority of the people that are listening to this, then if you only need what we call 1-to-1, 30 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest, then that 30 seconds probably wasn't your balls to the wall effort. And I say this as somebody who can identify that there are times where I'm like, yeah, I definitely didn't go to my absolute max during that particular session that particular work interval, because I was able to pretty much jump right back on it. So it's okay to understand that there are going to be times where maybe if you're doing 30-30, if that's the way that it's programmed, then you're not going all out during that 30. It doesn't mean you aren't working hard. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you're not working hard during that 30 seconds. I'm just saying we can just simplify this whole thing and stop overcomplicating something that just really doesn't need to be more complicated in a world that gives us all the complications that we need. All right. So let's switch gears here and talk about a couple of different ways that people can utilize cardio. I generally would put it into two buckets. You've got folks that are utilizing cardio because they want it to help them burn fat. And then you've got folks that are utilizing cardio because they want to, excuse me, they want to utilize it for heart health. So you basically got body composition and you've got heart health. One person can be focused on utilizing cardio for both. So it is not a or situation, even though I probably just framed it that way. It's not an or situation. I generally would just say that based on a lot of conversations that I will have, whether it's with a prospective new client or just general fitness conversation, these are some of the attributes that I see when somebody is utilizing cardio for body composition or when somebody's utilizing it for heart health. I will start off first by just identifying that if you are using cardio for burning fat, let me try to give you a quick breakdown of how that actually works, because I am not of the camp to say cardio can't help you burn fat. Like, that would be really dumb. Here's the difference though. Sometimes people utilize the term burning fat, and when you really like press them and break it down and you ask, okay, so when you say it burns fat, are you talking burning body fat or are you talking burning dietary fat? Because even the content that's out there about this helps burn fat, notice that there's not a whole lot of clarification of, are you talking about body fat or are you talking about dietary fat? Because are you making an assumption that the individual's in a caloric deficit or not? So just keep that in mind. So just to lay the groundwork here, cardio does help with fat loss because it is going to increase how many calories you burn just overall, because that's really the key when it comes to losing weight and losing body fat. They're not the same thing, but I'll use both of those. You still are going to have to create a calorie deficit no matter what. So when you do move more, especially through consistent cardio, you are going to raise your total energy output. That's going to happen. So if you are burning more calories than you're eating, then generally your body will, at some point when it runs out of nutrients, so it runs out of carbohydrates and fats, then it will utilize the fat oxidation process, which the way that body fat is lost is through things like sweat, pee, and breath. Those are generally the three ways that fat is lost. Then it will pull from those things, or it will excrete those things in order to then have you start losing fat. So that's what it does to basically cover that gap. So yes, an increase in cardio, which is an increase in the number of calories that are being exerted during that particular period of time, if in conjunction with also consuming less calories, then yes, that can assist. Now, that's not the complete picture, and I don't have another episode to go into all of the different nuances right now. There is a previous episode that I did all about TDEE, which will help break down calorie expenditure and how that actually works. The thing that most people miss is just because you're burning fat during a session doesn't mean that you're actually losing body fat. Many times when people are talking about you're losing fat or you're using fat, they might be referring to the fat that you ate. So dietary fat, not necessarily tapping into stored body fat. So this is one of those things that years ago, when I started really digging into exercise from a professional standpoint, there's this phrase, like in most industries, like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's one of those things where I was like, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Really pay attention that when people talk about equating exercise to losing fat, how often they don't clarify if they're equating doing exercise with losing body fat or dietary fat. Like, just listen for it and let me know how often you hear it. You may hear it once in a while, but how often you hear it. So long story short, cardio is a tool that you can use to help you create that deficit, especially if your nutrition is dialed in. So, All right. So let's say that you are utilizing cardio for body composition. So as we just covered, cardio can absolutely help with fat loss, but only when it's utilized the right way, i.e., you also are still going to have to be in a caloric deficit. Some other pieces where it can help from a body composition standpoint, it can help just overall because you're going to be utilizing more calories of energy in that moment. So it will increase your total daily energy expenditure. Now, keep in mind that you have things throughout the rest of the day. And this is where what I was talking about way early in this episode, where people do endless amounts of cardio. And then sometimes they're wondering, why am I still not losing weight? Well, it is not unheard of that the more and more you're doing cardio. So I have had multiple people who've come to me and are doing 3, 4, 5 stairmaster sessions of 1 hour per session, and then also going for a run here or there. And then they're wondering why they're not improving their body composition at all. One, we're noticing that they're spending more time doing cardio than they are with strength training. So that's impacting just the overall look and the amount of muscle that they have. Two, they're finding for some folks, it seems to be kind of a split camp here. For some folks, the more cardio that they do, they get really ravenous. We have others where the more cardio that they do, they seem to be fine. They actually notice that there's not a lot that impacts them from a hunger standpoint. So that's a piece too. And then three, though, and this is the thing that sticks out to me many times, is folks doing a whole lot of cardio and then there being this effect later on where they hit the 2 p.m., 3 p.m. complete crash. Like they're doing this in the morning, then in the afternoon, they just feel dead to the world. And then by the time that they get home and they've basically just like hopped up on stimulants and caffeine and coffee and a whole bunch of other things and another Alani to try and get throughout the day. And then all of a sudden they're wondering why they're like just completely dead. And what happens is they're moving a lot less outside of their training because they're dead to the world from the cardio that they did earlier. So again, it's got to be utilized correctly. But again, cardio can help with body composition. It's just getting the right mix. And that's where somebody who understands programming can really help you out. You've got to get the right mix, pair it with the proper strength training and somewhat of a sustainable nutrition plan, understanding there'll be sacrifices in the short term in order to make it happen. So understand that if you are utilizing cardio for body composition, it should be used primarily more as a supplement in your overall fitness regimen for body composition, not the foundation of how you're trying to reach your body composition goals. That would be my suggestion there. All right. And then if you are in the camp of utilizing, or if you also utilize cardio for heart health, and this is really where my energy is going into for my own training right now, is utilizing cardio primarily for the heart health benefits. So we say that, and you'll hear people say like, yeah, I do cardio for heart health, but what does that actually mean? So here's three things that potentially cardio can help with if you are truly doing it for heart health. So first one would be, it can help with your overall stroke volume. So your heart pumps more blood per beat. So that can be helpful. Also, the more that you train properly and do cardio for heart health, you will typically find that you recover better, and that then leads to a lower resting heart rate. So your heart becomes more efficient, which is always a plus. And then also just overall better blood vessel health. So we're talking like reducing the risk of high blood pressure, stroke, and other types of heart disease. So the same way that you would lift weights to train your muscles, you do cardio to train your heart to become stronger and more efficient. And to go back to what I was talking about with the talk test and then the RPE scale, like different levels of exertion and intensity for cardio, even low to moderate intensity cardio a few times a week can all reports say that can dramatically improve your heart health markers. And this is a piece that I really strongly want to like shout from the mountaintops when it comes to the benefits of cardiovascular exercise, because from my observation, we as a culture in the fitness industry have just become so adamant I'm putting so many things through the filter of here's why you should do this from the angle of it helps keep you toned and lean. Here's why you should do this from the filter of it helps you lose weight. Here's why you should do this because it helps blunt cravings so you won't overeat. It's like everything or many things being put through the filter of doing it specifically because of weight loss or fat loss versus can we also include some of the things that don't have to do with losing weight? Because if 99% of the marketing is all about losing the benefits of something for losing weight, then why do we think that people keep bouncing back, or not bouncing back, but keep reverting and backsliding after they've lost the weight and they gain it all back? Because we keep putting all these things through the filter of you do these things in order to lose weight, as opposed to you do these things because it's good for your heart health, your overall strength, your longevity, your quality of life. And yeah, there can be ways that we take those same things and then we tweak them and we adjust them, pair them with some other pieces, and that will also help you lose weight, lose body fat, if that's something that we need to do also. It's just when we typically tout something for one thing, then it's like, I mean, I get where people fall off the wagon so much because we keep talking about these things from the aspect of how they're benefits for what should really be a short period of the year. We're not talking about how these things are great for overall maintenance. So that's just my soapbox there. All right. So that covers cardio for heart health. So again, just to wrap this up, at this point, we've gone through identifying what cardio is, spent some time talking through, pun intended, the talk test and how to get an understanding of low versus moderate versus high intensity. Then also I spent a little bit of time sharing my point of view on sit and HIIT. And at the end of the day, let's just keep it simple. When you want to do high intensity, do high intensity. We don't need to split hairs around, well, it's HIIT because your intensity of 7 to 8.5. But then once you hit intensity of 8.75 to 10, then it becomes sit. Like, let's just keep it simple. Is it high intensity? And truly high intensity, utilize that talk test. You should not be able to catch up with your best friend in class as you're doing a high intensity workout. Like, it just shouldn't be possible. Then it's a moderate intensity workout, and that's okay. Just call it what it is, a moderate intensity boot camp. Good to go. All right. And then finishing out talking about the tenets of how you utilize cardio for body composition and how we utilize cardio for heart health. All right. If you have found this episode helpful at all, I would truly appreciate it if you passed it on to someone, friend, family member, coworker, even somebody that you don't like, who you think just might improve, or might be impacted by something that you heard here today. So thank you again for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I truly appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.